All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Excess Exceed, the show where I, a new, inexperienced Exceed player, by treachery, have kidnapped or tricked an expert into sitting down with me and talking about an Exceed character. But today, my trap worked too well. I have two experts here. I'm sitting down with Koronair and MadFnorder to talk about Beheaded. Um, Both of you, thank you so much for being on my show. There is no payment.
Darn.
The
I'm
payment
just
is that you have to sit and listen to me talk.
okay. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. So
Demand to
quick
be paid in
disclaimer.
friendship.
Yes. Now, yeah, we're bound together now. So quick disclaimer before we get started. Two disclaimers really. One is we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. This is sort of based on tournament strategy and competitive strategy. Uh, if that's not how you like to play Exceed, if you like to do the fun meme stuff, please do that stuff. Exceed is a fun game. Whatever keeps you playing longer is what you should be doing. Um, if you find tournament stuff fun, hopefully this will have some insight for you. But if not, please just play the way you want to play. And the other part of it is we are going to be talking about strategy pretty absolutely here. So just for brevity's sake, we're going to say things like, this is probably always correct, or don't ever do this. That's got big asterisks next to them. If you think that we are wrong about the lines we're discussing for this character or for any character on this show, please prove us wrong. Develop your own style of play with Beheaded and tell us why that line of play is better than ours. I would love to hear from you. So with all that said, Coroner and Mad, tell me about Beheaded.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start by saying I'm sorry to everyone who picks up this character. There is so Beheaded is a season 4 promo character. And season 4 had some tumultuous development, and as a promo, he was developed near the end of its life cycle. And the version that we were presented with I was privileged to help work as part of the playtesting team for season 4. So I got to see Beheaded in his he's almost ready for print form. And I had concerns, and I proceeded to get some of the other testers together and went on a 12 or 13 game win streak with Beheaded to show that my concerns had some validity. He was incredibly powerful, oppressively so, and you need to get tapped down in a bunch of different areas. So if you ever lost a game as Beheaded, it is my fault. I'm sorry. And if you won, it was despite me dragging you down, so that just makes you an even better Exceed player. So,
But everyone who has ever beaten a Beheaded, they thank you every night before they go to bed.
Yeah.
They should.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
So,
I think throughout this lesson, Mad, you're going to be chiming in with some story time from Beheaded's dev cycle. Is that correct?
yeah, mostly, I have still our notes from back in the day. I'm going to point out a few, and if you think this card is bad, imagine if,
Gotcha.
kind of moments. But I mean, we all would love if Phaser had a power number instead of an A. That would be great, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So, um, Cora, go ahead.
No, that was disagreement.
Very well. So, I'll start by talking about how I see the strengths and weaknesses of Beheaded. He is he starts as a very versatile character. He can fight it in both close and mid range. He's got some pretty potent specials that can generate some good mix ups. He's got two sort of what I call toolkit ultras. They're not meant to win the game on their own, but they can definitely get you out of certain situations. And his sort of core mechanic, which we should probably focus in on, which is his very unique Exceed mode.
Right. I'm looking at his character card and I'm seeing that his front side has no effect at all.
Yes. So the key to Beheaded is, of course, looting, and the loot comes in the form of finding these signature Beheaded scrolls. When you exceed with a reasonable exceed cost of 2, your exceed mode says now gain a trait of your choice. In addition, you get a small stat bonus, +1 power, +1 speed, and then clean up. So after the next strike, you will revert back to normal, and you could theoretically exceed again. These traits all modify his specials and ultras, and they start with reasonable but modest stats. And when you add these traits onto them, they go from reasonable and modest to incredible, especially once you start adding them all together. It's worth noting, for better or worse, these are specials and ultras. So a lot of people forget about the ultras getting these boosts and how powerful it can make them. But the flip of that coin is you have to very carefully decide what you're going to get and when you're going to get it, and that is, I think, one of the central tensions of playing him.
Right. And also, Mad, no normals, correct?
No, yes.
They don't get the boosts at all, but they do benefit from his temporary exceed mode. This +1 power, +1 speed, that applies to the normals just as well as it applies to any of his specials. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So just to briefly talk about, +1 power, +1 speed is a great and terrible boost at the same time. It either matters incredibly or not at all. May sound a little silly, but what I mean by this is looking at +1 power. +1 power is great. You do 1 more damage to your opponent. But especially when speaking about the normal attacks, it tends to not make any of the breakpoints that would ordinarily happen seem any better. Your
Right.
grasp is not break.
Assault isn't going to stun sweep, anything like that.
Yeah, grasp isn't going to break spike, so on. +1 speed sounds great, but you have to remember when you exceed, you pass the turn. So +1 speed really just means I'm winning the tie. Until and unless your opponent passes the turn back to you, then you can make a better use of it. So it's very important, I think, for holding tempo. But one of the, I think, key things you can do as Beheaded is make this feel more oppressive than it is. And one of the counterplay notes is don't be as scared of that stat bonus from the flip. You're more concerned with what trait just came in.
Sorry. So the thing I was saying was so this is here to confirm the hit into the next exceed, not necessarily a benefit in and of itself. Is that accurate?
And it is because, if you're here to talk about exceed, you can do the math, and you get 2 gauge, you flip over,
right?
And if you can get that first hit, you're already 1 away from your next flip. Because
right. And this makes it more likely to get that next hit.
Yeah, momentum. It's about keeping your momentum going.
Gotcha. Okay. And so the traits that we have brutality, survival, and tactics, and I'm sure we're going to get into how they interact with all of these cards down here in just a second. Before we do, though, I guess I have 2 questions about it. Number 1 is, when we go down and evaluate these cards, should I automatically be saying that these cards kind of have these boosts for most of the game? Like, how easy is it to get a couple of these traits online? Like, so another way to ask that question is, should I just mentally edit in my head that infantry bow pretty much always has 4 power or always has 6 power at range 4? Should I just kind of be imagining that brutality is on the card? Or is it difficult enough to get these boosts that we also need to consider the specials kind of like on their own footing?
I would say you need to consider them on their own footing, just because it doesn't necessarily take a crazy long time to get some of the traits, especially the first one that you get. But by the time you get all three of them, if you get all three of them, the game is probably a good bit underway. And at least when I play him, it can change which one comes out first. So when you're evaluating the move, it's good to have a good idea of how its base card functions before the edits, since which trait you take out first might change depending on the game and who you're fighting.
Right. And that was actually going to be my next question, that it doesn't seem like there is really a prescribed order for these. You can choose whichever one you want, and it would be kind of like largely matchup based. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
1,000% matchup based. That is, at least to me, the key thing when you're picking your traits is you want to look at it's, to me, it's more than what you're doing. It's what is your opponent doing and what are their cards. So you want to look at what their moves are and where their stats are and see, at least to me, which trait will give you over breaking points. So like, do they have a lot of 4 guard? Well, then that +2 power is going to make more of your specials start breaking cards they wouldn't otherwise break.
Right.
Do they do a lot of little chip damage? Okay, well, suddenly I can start tanking things and hit them back. Are they at range 1? Like, does that range give me the ability to hit them where they can't hit me? I usually look at exactly, like, literally the numbers. How many of my cards would change to now be victorious in a one-on-one fight with their cards?
Got it. Okay. So that's kind of the mental math that you're doing. You're not saying, okay, step 1, beheaded, I get 2 gauge brutality. Step 2, tactics. Step 3, survival. It is kind of this in the moment decision or opponent by opponent decision that you're advocating for.
Yeah.
It even depends on what cards have I spent to get here.
Yes.
If I've used my long range options against someone who is a more evasive fighter, tactics looks better for bringing other moves to getting that to use the fighting game term, hit confirm in play, because the way I phrase this question, this might be a simplistic way of putting it, but question 1 of the questions you should ask as playing Beheaded is, are you the beatdown?
Okay. So for people who don't know that term, can you explain that, Matt?
Sure. I mean, it's actually, I think, a magic term first, but it
is. Yeah, it's from MTG.
Right, and I think it applies to Beheaded's game plan. A lot of people, and sort of the elementary, I'm going to say, like, the basic line for Beheaded is, I just want to trade. I just want to hit my opponent. I'll get gauge. My stats are going to become overwhelming once I have all these traits. As long as I'm connecting with the cards I play, we're in business.
Right.
And then you play against someone who's a little more familiar with Beheaded, and all of a sudden, they're at 24 life and you're at 11, and the fight seems a lot more difficult.
Right. So you still have those overwhelming stats by the end of the game, but the end of the game is a much bigger hill to climb for you than it would be if you had been trading evenly the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So that's part of it, like you have to assess what your opponent's going to do and going to be able to do to you. And one of the great things about Beheaded as we get into the kit is he generally does have a tool. The question is, does he have enough tools to really compete before these traits come in? And so asking yourself what trait you need, I will say, for me personally, most commonly, I'm greedy. I want to take brutality. And I want to take it as quickly as possible because, as we said, getting into this trade game means that brutality both makes your opponent flinch and it makes your mix-ups more live, and it also just increases your payout when you do call it right. But a lot of the times it'll be warring between, do I want my payouts better, or tactics in, do I want my ranges? Because lest we forget, range and speed are very closely linked in Exceed. So there's no speed trait, But there is a range trait, and that is nearly the same thing, because when you have a that we'll get to, like a speed 6, 1 to 2, now it's 1 to 3. And now we're making assaults look silly and doing cool stuff. So
Sure.
I love survival. There are times I've picked it, but it's usually when I've made early game mistakes and I need to ensure I'm going to be able to survive.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So one thing that you mentioned that I want to come back to really quick is this sort of mentality about trading, where with most other characters in the game, if I assault into my opponent's sweep, for example, I'm kind of sad, right? Like I'm not. I feel like I like clearly they won that trade. With Beheaded, is 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 there a mentality shift there where I'm saying, well, I got gauge, and my gauge is maybe scarier than the opponent's gauge, or am I still trying to avoid those trades if I can?
I think that gets into what I call question 2 of Beheaded, which is, are you playing predictably with your play? Because a lot of the time, again, in sort of the beginner mentality of Beheaded, the answer is, I just want to hit. I'm going to play an attack on curve, by which I'm referring to the speed curve.
Yep.
Typically something 7 speed or better at range
Yep.
1, 6 or better, 5,
4.
4.
Yep. Sure.
I'm playing something on curve. Maybe I'll get clapped back by a focus or a sweep, but I hit and I did it, and I'm that much closer to my next trait. And it's not just a question of your opponent plays slows and plays sweeps to cover this. It's a question of, when your desire for just hitting is very high, your opponent can make hard callouts with things like EX attacks. Like
Right.
you may be sitting there at range 2 and say, I've got cross in hand, I've got an infantry bow to follow up with, I'm going to just slam cross, and they will play a EX cross or a Shoryuken or a similar move because, quote unquote, it's obvious what you wanted.
Right.
And I think,
And because the upside of you getting it is scary enough for your opponent that they're going to be making a plan to stop it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
I think you also need to look at. So I generally think, yeah, you can't be, you can't just be wanting to hit. It is better for you than someone who does not charge up. It's like the first gauge in the Street Fighter character is huge, right? So your
For
gauge is
crits,
also
right, sure.
pretty big for you because you are getting your traits online, but that grows as it goes. It doesn't just stop at 1. But you want to look at also, if you're growing, are they growing, right? Like who are you facing? Are you fighting season 2 that also kind of wants to trade into their transforms, or are you fighting someone who will stay static at where they're at? Because if you're aiming only to trade, you'll probably be call outable. But it is a little bit more beneficial for you if you grow and they don't, versus if they grow and you do, and they grow faster than you do, and you grow at a slow pace.
I got it. Okay, that makes sense. And that sort of speaks to what Mad was saying about who the beatdown is. So in those situations where they are going to reach kind of their final form faster than you are, it's incumbent on you to be stopping them rather than they be stopping you from you reaching your final form. So again, we're back to the idea that a lot of the mentality for beheaded play is kind of matchup dependent. So okay, so we've got our 3 traits. Over the course of the game, I'm looking to get all 3 of them as a matter of course. Like, is there any situation where I'm not gunning for a 3rd trait if I already have 2, or is my whole game plan centered around getting these 3 things online so I can just overstat my opponent?
I personally think that I love how that you're doing this, because I have these questions here. You skipped ahead to question 5, which is one of the biggest pitfalls of playing Beheaded is, how are you actually winning the game? Because
Okay.
you can play stat Legos and feel great, and then find yourself in a board state you can't actually win from. And I think some of the most powerful tools for Beheaded to actually close a game out are his ultras, and they're both 1 gauge, which isn't very much, especially in the greater context of ultras, where you'll see something that costs maybe 5.
5, sure.
But 1 always seems to matter more to Beheaded because it's like, oh, I gave up ground. I think in general you shouldn't hesitate to play these cards, especially when they get you out of a really rough situation. And I think that his ultras are, I'm not going to say essential, but are incredible tools for closing out a game. So there are definitely situations where I will have 1, 2, or even 1 trait if the game has gone very unusually, and say, I need to hold gauge either so I can threaten these ultras, or use them to get those last few life out of my opponent.
Okay. That makes sense. And I'm looking at these cards and these traits in this exceed mode and all that stuff, and nowhere does it say when you have all 3 of these, you win the game. It's not, you didn't summon Exodia. You didn't put together an unstoppable combo just by getting these traits. So there's other parts of Beheaded play than Mad. What did you call it? Stat Legos.
Yes,
I like that. I like that term. So okay, so we're talking about the same way exceed math goes with other characters. Are you exceeding, or are you playing an ultra? Are you spending your gauge to crit or change cards? Like so these resource considerations on Beheaded are the same. They're just shaped differently because he kind of has those like 3 stages of exceeding.
Thresholds. He has thresholds.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. You really want to know what's left in your deck is what you want to be looking at, right? Because if you know that your opponent doesn't have anything that is really like a super close range 1 guy, right? Like a range 1 Glapper hits a little bit at 2, doesn't do anything else. And you haven't had tactics out yet. But you know you have like Wrenching Whip and Infantry Bow in your deck already. Adding 1 range onto them when they can't hit you where they're at already isn't necessarily going to help you per se. Right. Or like if you don't necessarily need the extra guard and the armor for what's going on, so they don't hit chunky, but you know both. You know you have like 10 cards left, and both of your assault shields are in your deck. Assault shield isn't really online without the survival.
Without the survival. Time. Okay,
so you know what's coming up, so you can prep a little bit more for that. But if the cards that you have left for you to use don't actually gain a practical benefit from whatever trait is left, you don't need to prioritize it as hard.
Gotcha. And Koronair, that speaks to something that you said earlier about like you go through and literally count them, right? You say like, okay, so in this matchup, Assault Shield benefits from survival, Wrenching Whip and Twin Daggers benefit from tactics. 2 is more than 1. I should go for tactics before survival. Like that's your mindset for it, correct?
Yeah, a little bit. You look at what you have and what beats theirs, and then you take into account what you've already seen hit the field and what you know is in your hand. Right.
Got it.
So like, hey, I want to get my numbers to beat your numbers in the most instances possible. But if I know those 2 cards are out for you, don't worry about it. If I know only Assault Shield benefits in this circumstance versus your character from survival, but I have 1 of them in my hand and I think it's going to get me to my next trait, I might put it out there anyway.
Okay. No,
but generally an easy method of doing it if you don't have if you don't know how to vibe check and you don't have a good sight reading on what something is, you can literally count.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, if you are in a situation where it's clear just from the numbers, and the numbers are gonna be able to tell you. Okay. So from what I'm hearing is these are super important. Get them. Don't throw the game away to get them. And when you get them, that doesn't mean that the game is over. You still have to play. You just have kind of overwhelming stats to make closing out the game hopefully pretty easy. Is that accurate?
I'd say that's pretty accurate. I'd be more willing to do even or slightly uneven trades for them than I would be with other characters, since I think your life is a little bit of a resource to get these running. But do not just eat 8 damage punches to the face to get one trait on mine.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And as we go through the cards, I'm sure that the actual value of these things is going to be more apparent when we start talking about breakpoints and the speed curve and things like that. Before we jump, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ned.
I just wanted to say that the whole conversation there made me super happy because, like I said, I had these questions to ask when you're playing Beheaded, and one of them is, are you predictable in your play? And then there's another question is, are you being predictable in your deck shape? And I think that's something that Beheaded can get especially punished for, because if you're playing a normal game of Exceed and you get down to the last 10 cards in your deck, there's options that you had that are gone.
Right.
And those are that information is known to both you and your opponent. Now, because these boosts are only on specials and ultras, and some of these ultras hit better or work better at certain ranges than others, there is a point where your opponent can look at the 9, 10, 12 cards they're dealing with and say, all of a sudden I am way less worried. And this can happen to any character, but I think it's a lot more pronounced when it happens on Beheaded. And so just as a general note, you want to watch for the traits that are going to benefit the cards you have left in that first reshuffle. But this is also a character I would say do not hesitate to reshuffle, to refresh your options and refresh your mix-ups, because especially once his engine is going, you're not going to deck yourself out. This is not a deck yourself out.
The game
character.
won't last long enough to run out of cards with.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least that's my opinion. So we should probably get to talking about the kit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. Unless anybody has other sort of general preliminary notes about the way Beheaded plays, like game shape wise, let's talk about this kit.
Now I'm ready to move into the kit.
Let's do it.
It's a great kit. It's a
I'm
great
gonna bring
kit.
everything down here so we can.
I do think it's really funny because I completely agree with your notes on the traits there, but I almost always end up with tactics last, weirdly enough.
There's just so many times where putting Wrenching Rip at 1 to 4 is just like incredibly oppressive to some people. It's just like you're coming in when I say you get to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll bet you, like from what it sounds like, and from the sort of cursory examination I've done of people who, hearing conversations about Beheaded go around in Discord servers and stuff, it seems like everybody has a different priority of these traits. And I mean, some people that I've talked to about this are actually way more prescriptive than you guys are being, saying like, okay, brutality first, then tactics, then survival every time. This is actually maybe the first time that I've heard, no, do it by matchup. And do it based on deck shape and things like that. So I think that probably everybody has a very different evaluation of what these things are actually worth. So hopefully one of the things that we can get out of this lesson is giving people the context that they need to be able to decide that priority for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. To me, I think the power of Beheaded is not being exceedingly good at one thing, but being able to adapt into the thing that their opponent is bad at handling with.
Okay.
Which is why I would focus much more on what it looks like rather than what I want up front.
Okay. So to use the sort of archetype schema that we sometimes see in the Exceed community, what Koronair is describing is like a counterplay character. So there's actually some similarity there between Beheaded and like Ryu, for example, who's saying, I have tools. As soon as you run out of something, I can hammer you with the thing that you can't beat anymore. Is that kind of like how
That's the way that I play him at the very least. That's exactly how I play him.
Interesting. So yeah, I would not have made that call. So that's it. Like, and that speaks to my inexperience as a player. But that actually like I play counterplay characters kind of as a rule. So that actually means that I'm probably more likely to pick up Beheaded than I thought I would be based on my read of the kit. So that's really cool.
Yeah, when you asked at the beginning what characters would be similar to me, I think it would depend on what you enjoy from him, based on how you play him. Because when I look at him, I see a mixture of a counterplay character and a Season 2 character. So if you like the growth aspect, you can go towards 2, where you get you're gonna be weaker and take more hits up front, but you're gonna get stronger and grow more towards the end and ready just to wall up almost anything. Or more towards like Ryu or even Lychee for me. I play heavily. Hey, where do you want to be? Where do you not want to be? Like what focus on what the other person is versus on you. I think it's what sparks joy, but there's definitely two different aspects within that you need to put together.
Sure, that makes sense. Cool. Okay. And we'll come back to that at the end of the conversation about other characters like Beheaded that we can talk about and recommend people. But yeah, let's get into this kit.
All right.
Where are we starting? We doing ultras first? We go in speed order? I'm good with whatever you want to do.
I think we should definitely start with the specials and then get the ultra second, because these are very important, but these are what you're going to be dealing with and primarily how you're going to interact with these traits.
So I mean, as the resident novice here, the thing that I'm afraid of is twin daggers. And I feel like we should either start there or we should leave it as the sort of piece de resistance. But I want to hear about this card because I've lost games to it before, and this is the thing that is terrifying to me about Beheaded. So maybe we
should
there.
be scared of it.
Yeah.
This card is brutal. Trait pun not intended. And he has a built-in combo with Phaser when we get to that. It's a really powerful clapback. Once you have brutality up, it crushes sweep and catches cross. That is not with brutality up. That is
there's ultras that do that. Like that's not common for a special.
Right. When you can get this rider, even without any buffs, this is 1 to 2, 5, 6, and I will play that any day of the week. I don't know about you.
Right. Yeah, that's already really good. So at the start of the game, this is an on curve option that on curve at 2 hits for 5. Seems pretty good. Sometimes hits for 5. That if it is the turn after a strike rider, applies to both my strikes if I have advantage and my opponent's strikes. So if they punch me and then I hit them back with, that's why you called it a clapback card. So it works for both of us. And then when I get traits on it, what actually changes here? So this winds up being
I think
7
this
power.
Yeah, 7 power means it only loses to focus without even anything on top of it. Survival is very important sometimes. The most important thing about survival is it lets you play this at range 1 at certain spacings. Namely, if you have the back to the wall such that your opponent can't push you out, they also can't pull you past. Because at speed 6, you're worried about grasp.
And actually, one second, Matt. Keep talking. Here's a opponent for Beheaded, real quick, so you can demo this a little bit easier.
Right. So if you have survival, if the board state I'm talking about is something like this, Twin Daggers is perfectly safe to slam right here, because even if my opponent grasps, they pull me 2 at most. I'm still hitting as long as I have that 1 armor to guard from survival. They can't push me. They can't pull me. They're just getting ruined. Now, of course, if you have tactics, it doesn't matter where they send you, because now we're at range 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 2, and it becomes a consistent hit confirm from anywhere. And I think it's the heartbreaking thing about this card is it's so good early, it's so good late, it's so good as an EX, and you get 4 chances to play it during the game. That's probably the biggest thing I can say about this card.
Right, and you wanna hit it as many times as you can. So quick question about that. So and ofobviously tactics, when you put that on top of it, it becomes an above curve option at 3, which is also awesome. How often are you playing this on defense? To me, the fear of losing to a cross would scare me off of it. Board state dependent, obviously, but is this something that my opponent should be afraid of me punching them back with on their turn, or is this something that is saying, okay, you hit me, I'm going to hit you back harder?
Well,
That is a
I
good
think
question.
I think it depends on what kind of opponent you're fighting. Again, which is like for everything. But for if you have someone who's a range character, and yeah, I would not be shocked to see them throw out a cross, both to diffuse the twin daggers option and also to get the hell out of there. But
Right.
if you have someone who wants to be really close, especially if you have looking at what you have up, so you have tactics up or something like that, or they are just really close range and they're right next to you, close enough to do the cross, you can consider not playing it because you don't want to get duped, and it's a very, very strong card, which is a solid thing to think. But also you have to think about if they play cross, they end up all the way over here. So on the one hand, you might lose out on your card. On the other hand, they've lost positioning to you in this instance. So now they're all the way across the board from you, and if they're close range only, you're going to do just fine, especially if you have a card to follow up on them crossing across the board from you in your hand, where they might not. So I think it really depends on who you're fighting, how much value they'll get out of running the hell away from you versus how likely I think they are to do it. Because you could just do a cheeky one just to bait out those twin daggers. I mean, I won't say it's never happened, but usually I look at how does this help them? Are any of them out? How does this help them? And if it does help them and it gets me, where am I going to be at?
Right.
And sometimes threatening them into running across the board when they need to be next to me and have no ways to run in is still a win, even if I don't have my close range guy.
Right. That makes
Speaking
sense.
of, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention on top of that, obviously, the conversation changes a little bit when you have other strong 6-speed options in a kit that doesn't retreat you. So like Ken's Axe Kick, for example, would make me, again, a little bit afraid to play Twin Daggers on defense because he might be initiating with that. But for many characters, Cross is their option that would stun out Twin Daggers at this range. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's like, so a lot of what you're saying about it being just a little speed sensitive also echoes why I said the EX of this is incredible, but it's heartbreaking to play because you're using up both copies.
Yeah.
But my goodness, that stat line. I also wanted to not neglect talking about this boost because this is a very unusual boost. There are a few other instances in it, but it has two very weird functions, and you might be like, is this worth giving up a copy of Twin Daggers for? And the answer is sometimes this is incredibly useful. And this links more into talking about closing the game. Opponent cannot move. This is not opponent cannot take the walk or move action. This is effects that they can't move with boosts. They can't move during a strike. And sometimes you'll be playing an opponent who has a really powerful ultra that they're threatening at a very particular range. This ultra advances 3 and will blow you up, and they're sitting right at range 4. This, by playing this, you do get your opponent, in theory, they either have to, if they pass the turn back to you, you're in great shape because Beheaded has a ton of ways of hitting a target that can't actually run at him. And if they take the discard, you just got 2 free damage, and that cannot be underestimated when, again, your goal is to drag your opponent kicking and screaming just across that 0 line. So,
Right.
there are a couple of situations where your opponent has a very beautiful boost setup and everything is coming together for them, and you say, how do you feel about standing there? And
Right.
I think this 2 damage choice is legitimate. The cost is steep. I also do want to say before I forget, this card almost entirely unchanged through playtesting. There was a time we tested it down to 2 power, but it basically survived untouched because both the thrill of playing it was so fun, and it was kind of just became this cornerstone of his kit that we didn't touch Twin Daggers.
Yeah,
So this is like the
I have
iconic beheaded card.
slight varying opinions on the wolf trap, because I feel like it's something that I would almost never use unless it's specifically the answer, right? So like if I'm fighting, I rarely fight against someone where, unless you're in the very, if you're at the very end of the game, usually you want the twin daggers, but occasionally if you know it's not helpful and you're going to move them down from like 5 life to 3 life, just in range so that they can't soak a grasp or something like that. That can be useful as well. Or I think what's interesting with it, because I almost never use this because I think it's so expensive being on Twin Daggers, but I think adding in with the new seasons with the cards, or some old ones, but cards that go away at the end of the turn. So like those, okay, +2 power on your turn, add this gauge, or on your turn discard this, draw 2. Sort of ones like those where you know you don't want to hand it back to them, but you don't want to do something else, just stalling out.
Oh, I see. So okay, so that actually sort of speaks to what Mad was saying too. That the decision to take the 2 non-lethal damage is not then followed by their strike. That's their turn.
Yes, that's their turn.
Right.
The power of it is the turn, right? So that they
Right.
don't both get the extra ability and the ability to punch you in the face on the same turn if it's something that you know the card they're threatening is like a dive or an assault, something they need to run in on. So they can't actually capitalize on certain options if they can't move.
Okay. And so in a situation like you said, like where there's a time limit on their thing. So somebody with an overdrive in season 5.
Yeah,
for
overdrive,
example.
exactly.
Sure. I see.
I find this is an exceedingly rare instance. I'm to come about. So I personally, but to me, that's when I think it'd be most useful is if they have a time locked. They're threatening a card where they need to move, and they're in a time locked situation that you can diffuse.
That makes sense. And the price of diffusing it is worth not hitting with twin daggers later on.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it so rare.
I'm skipping ahead a bit, but I will play Wolf Trap when the damage from Wolf Trap means I'm going to kill them with Wave of Denial anyway.
Yeah, when you're getting them into the range of like very very low life, I can also see into lethal.
Okay, so by default, this card is twin daggers. Very occasionally and with intention, it's Wolf Trap.
Yes, I think that's the key point is with intention. Do not play it just to play it. You play it as it's a trap. You need to have a plan.
Right, sure. And a plan better than hit them with twin daggers.
Yes, the plan needs to be a plan, and a plan that's better than hit them with twin daggers.
And there's very few plans that fit that mold. I 100% agree.
That makes sense. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so big scary option gets better the more traits you put on it. Mostly benefits from brutality and tactics. Survival in kind of limited situations, like Mad demonstrated in board state. Dive attack. Tell me about this.
Love this card. Great card. Also the source of the best and worst openings you've ever had with this character. It is an above curve dive. It is speed 5 that hits from starting positions. Already we've got something great going on. What's the downside? It's only 3 power. It puts your opponent range 2, which is not always what you want for your follow-up. And it is just basically it is so sweepable. It is an eminently sweepable card.
Yeah, it is.
The biggest thing I will say about this is it's actually a card that I don't think gets a ton of benefit from traits. It's a close, not an advance, so this is not getting you out of the corner. So it's rare you're going to play this in close. You might wild swing it, but you're unlikely to play this at least until you're at range 3 or 4 anyway. Putting power on it brings it up to dive, but doesn't exceed it. And making this card work at range 5 is great with tactics, but there are other options you have that also come online at those ranges. So it's a good. It is a very useful early card, and it's a very useful card for establishing mix. And I will say there is a version of this card that existed that had 4 power, and it was just very silly.
Yeah, I find it's nice for the mix up at the beginning. It's a really good threat to have a speed 5 that hits at range 4, because it means they cannot simply freely slam whatever speed 4 they have or whatever speed 5 they have in response to you. Like it makes them have to question, okay, is this dive attack or is this infantry bow when they are responding to you initiating at range 4 on open. If you decide to open with an attack, it does make them have to think a second, or even if they open, like what your response will be, whether or not you'll come in or stay where you are, which is nice because a lot of there is a weakness when characters only have attacks that move them in and they have nothing where you stay still, where you just slam sweep, right? There, at the very least, is the choice between the two of them on whether or not you might be doing an infantry bow and then they slam sweep, they miss sweep entirely, and that's just a waste of a really solid defensive card.
Right. And Koronair, I know that you misspoke between speed and range, but also they will frequently be initiating if it's at range 4 with a speed 4 card.
Yes, that's the curve.
This is being above curve at range 4 means that you can also kind of reliably play it on defense. Like if you're second player in the opening position and they strike into you, you're like, okay, well, if this is, I don't know, Hadoken, or if it's dive, this covers both of those things.
Right.
So that there's a benefit to it there too, as just being able to get in on your opponent's turn as well, correct?
Yes, absolutely. It does. It lets it so if they don't have anything with guard, you can duke out their regular range speed 4 options, and you can get in on these things. I also like it as a chaser. If they're in close and I have survival up, if they play grasp, I'm back in your face. You can't get rid of me. If you play cross and you go away, I'm back in your face. You can't get rid of me.
Right.
So it's not going to get you out of the corner, but oftentimes if you've got that survival up there, if they're trying to run away from you for whatever reason, be it a ranger or the cards in their hand, or whatever reason they don't want me in their face, I'm back in your face again, and you can't do anything about it because it's a speed 5. So unless they're initiating an assault at range 1, I will be faster than all of everything under it, and anything over it isn't going to do enough damage to break me.
So with survival, you're saying basically it becomes like a fast Tatsu, where you're using it to catch cross, and you're using it maybe to keep the range that you've established for yourself. I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to be standing next to Beheaded, by the way. No cards that we've already talked about that would make them want to run away. All right, but no, that's a good use case for survival that I wouldn't have seen. That kind of turns it into a makeshift Tatsu like.
Right, especially because if they initiate, then it's the turn after a strike when you're right next to them again.
Oh my god, you're right. Okay, and they tried to get away, they couldn't get away. You twin
daggers. They thought they were safe. They thought they were throwing you away with an on curve option that you don't have an above curve option. They thought they were going to get you away to have a turn to relax. Nope. Twin daggers to the face again.
And they just used their cross, which would have been really nice against twin. Okay, that's really funny.
Exactly.
Okay. I admit I love that line. I love it. Not one I've actually used before, and I think that's part of the fun of this character. Because, like I said, I usually prioritize the other traits sometimes over survival, and survival is sometimes the luxury trait. But against very evasive characters, I had not seen that direct connection, and like I said, this is
I tend to end up with survival. I tend to end up with brutality, survival, and then tactics. I don't like to pick it just based on order, as we said from the beginning, but I end up with survival a lot. So
interesting. That's really cool. So, and the other thing I was going to ask is, obviously, the comparison between dive attack and another attack is dive. As Mad was saying, and as we were discussing, this is a fast dive. Dive advances, this closes. Most of the time, that feels like a side grade, right? It's not necessarily strictly better or strictly worse to advance rather than close with dive. You can uncorner yourself with dive. You wouldn't be able to with this attack. But the fact that dive, so just to make sure that I'm understanding this right, if this card advanced instead of closed, would it get more benefit out of tactics? Because then you could, for example, play it here and still have it hit if you 1, 2, 3, and then you hit at range 2. That would work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It would very much change the situations that you get to use it in. But because Beheaded, as we are starting to study, even just talking about that twin dagger survival situation, does love a cornered opponent. And so the ability to uncorner himself and then knock their opponent further into the corner would be delightful.
Would be pretty crazy, sure.
Probably, but I think Dive Attack is doing just fine. Like I said, there was a version of it that was at 4 power. That was not necessary, nor was it okay.
Got it.
We should also talk about Tornado. Like I was saying, I find that Dive Attack's value is higher in the early game and kind of goes down into late game because sometimes as a obvious answer to I want to get in, your opponent may or may not have the solution. As the game goes on and they have things like ultras that are online, the call out versus payoff for Dive Attack goes down even further. Tornado, I realized I said earlier how +1 speed isn't that big a deal. But +1 speed and +1 movement means you get to bend the curve and hand it back to your opponent. And this is just basically screaming, I have tactics and you don't. So this can be very powerful in setting up a number of terrible no-win situations just by getting that one space and saying to your opponent, I'm still a little bit faster than you.
Right, because normally when you back up, you are threatening a slower option. You can't grasp somebody at range 2, but that +2 speed +1 speed means that you're still probably on curve with whatever you're talking about, and you can maintain your mix up. This actually, and this is something, we were just talking about the relative merits of close versus advance. This position here, +1 speed, now advance your retreat 1, now you're cornered. That seems like a useful situation to put if I find myself there to get out of a corner with that. Is there any? I'm looking through the rest of his kit, and I'm not seeing any other speed boosts other than what would be on light. And I'm wondering, how often does Beheaded boost war? Is this something that you would play alongside another boost, or is this really are you cashing out after one strike generally when you're playing as Beheaded?
So we should say when we're talking about trying to boost or Beheaded that there's this ultra boost down here that's very notable.
True.
But it's true that there's not a ton of stats on these. But I think generally, like I said, his ability to have a tool and threaten multiple effective ranges is something I love about a character. I'm a Minato player, and he's notorious for being able to hit nearly any space on the board from any other space on the board if he's got just 2 or 3 cards to threaten.
This somehow explains so much.
We now know everything there is to know about Mad.
You can now disregard everything I've said as I've proven myself thoroughly untrustworthy. But that disgrace aside, I do think he's not necessarily someone who wants to wager too many cards on one strike, because there is one thing that I was kind of waiting to point out, and this is what I called it is the 4th of the 5 Beheaded questions, which is there is no reload on any of these cards.
Right.
There is no card advantage anywhere. And while the force costs aren't significant, they're not trivial. And especially for someone who probably wants to get the pressure and keep it on, your cards have to come from somewhere, and that is a difficult thing of the Beheaded momentum and tempo game, because despite the fact that he's got all these powerful stats, these cards we're looking at, he's not the best wild swinger in the world. Especially if he's wild swinging past an ultra, which would be an otherwise valuable tool that he wants. And especially in sort of the mid game where he might have one trait that makes his attacks better, but that doesn't necessarily make all of his attacks functional.
Or more consistent or something for wild swinging. Right.
Right. So the most effective thing I think about Beheaded's boosts, and this is also how I like to try and leverage his Exceed mode for the brief time that you're in it, is I will stare at my opponent and prepare. I will cause my opponent to flinch, because in mid to late game, a lot of other Exceed characters will decide how much gauge they're going to need for end game, and the rest is change cards fodder. Exceed needs every single gauge he ever gets. So you've got to think very carefully about when you spend cards. And so I would be very reluctant to bet 3 cards, 3 valuable cards, stuff like
on
light,
one strike. Sure.
on one strike. So he can, and he can also throw it on its head by, say, boosting Giant Killer and saying, I double dog dare you. Am I holding the EX? But I don't think it's his preferred mode of play.
Yeah, I generally agree in the sense that I wouldn't say he doesn't want to boost war. I'm not to say he doesn't want to boost, but when I look at the boost, I see one-time answers, right? Like the +0 to 1 range or the +1 speed advance or retreat 1. In the same way that his kit, when you build around with these, it's like, okay, I'm standing here. I know what you are threatening me with. I know what's in my hand. None of my attacks are the answer, the key, the tool that I have. But the boost can make something into a tool that I have. So all of a sudden with +1 range, okay, now I've got a speed 7, range 2. I have an answer right now. +1 speed, backup 1. Okay, I'm here, you're going to hit me with your equivalent of Twin Daggers, speed 6, hits like a truck. Okay, I've backed up 1. You can still hit me here, but I have an above curve cross. I can get the hell out of here, or I can smack you with Twin Daggers on your turn. No fear of cross, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily sit there and boost and boost and boost. I would, the same thing I say with Wolf Trap is you boost with intention, right? Like I am boosting not to necessarily power up something I already know is good, but I boost when I know you have something and I don't. Right, like here, this is a tool to get me out of the situation that I am in right now and keep my momentum going.
Got it.
Also,
okay.
And I'm sure someone in the comments is going to say, but what about Corrupted Power? Draw 2 cards and discard a card at random. That discard a card at random, it will lead to Heartbreak. Not to say I will never boost this, but this is not a reload in the traditional sense.
It's not. It's a, hey, I need to break your guard. I need to hit a breaking point, but I don't hit right now. Either because I don't have Brutality up, or it's a normal, or even with Brutality up, it's Wrenching Whip, and 5 won't break it. I need to be at 7 to break your sweep. I need to hit a breaking point. I need to be able to hit you from 1 space away. I need to be able to have... I need to get that 1 more speed because I need to move 1, but I know I will cede the turn to you, making you win our ties, so now I'm not afraid of that anymore. It's very much anticipating. You can't do it blindly. You have to know here's what I'm playing into, and here's what I think explicitly that they have to counter what I'm going for. They're not just generally good.
That makes sense to me.
Total agreement here. On the high level concept of it, it's about inverting your opponent's advantage with either action compression or immediate gain. But I do think there's just some merit in talking about the boost power and stare as a fear method, because one of the easiest ways to get cards with him is your opponent doesn't know what to do.
Sure.
That is one of those times you can steal a turn or 2 to prepare and give yourself the resources to close the game.
Right, and you might need that because you don't have the economy to sustain rushing somebody down forever.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's, I think, why I talk so much about having an end game plan as being important, more important for Beheaded than some other characters, because he is exactly the kind of character that you skid across the finish line in a broken heap. You have 3 life and 0 cards in hand and 0 cards engaged, but by gosh, you got him.
Mm-hmm.
But you made it. Okay, that makes sense.
I also make sure you are getting cards at the beginning while you're charging up. Like I tend to like a lot of times in Beheaded when I'm thinking about what to keep in my hand, aside from the usual, because I put, which has more weight, the usual. Okay, what do I need to win or not get crushed on the opener? What do I want for this character specifically that I'm fighting? Aside from that, I usually like to keep a lot of defensive options, because then at the very least, if I've got a sweep and a block in my hand and you're hitting me and I can get those not to be broken, I can be drawing more cards and setting myself up for my next hits on my turn and know that I'll be adding to my gauge to get my traits on your turn.
Right. Got it. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Cool. Okay. Let's jump over to Wrenching Whip. Tell me about I mean, looking at the stat line. This is on curve at 3. Hit, push or pull 1. Give me some use cases here for all Wrenching Whip.
Well, first I want to give you a nightmare.
Yes.
How would you like this hit effect to read? Hit, range 1, ignore armor.
Oh. Okay, I'm looking through the rest of his kit, and I'm not seeing any ignore armor effects. So that feels like something that he would really like to have. And as Beheaded's opponent, I don't want him to have it.
Well, that was one of the first things to go. If you thought the Twin Daggers mix-up was bad, imagine if you had to worry about, is it Twin Daggers at speed 6 or is it Wrenching Whip at speed 5? That also makes a mockery of my block.
Yeah, hope you enjoy blocking Twin Daggers. Got it. That's horrifying.
One of the first things to go. Sorry. Anyway.
No, that's fine.
No,
Yeah.
but again, no. Apologize in measured. Apologize in a measured way, because there's a lot of people who don't play Beheaded who are very happy with you right now.
Yeah. Some easy examples of uses for this card are so if you get a sweeper spike at range 3, you can get them, push them out, so you're not going to get clapped back. If you throw it at 3, you cannot get clapped back by that. You'll beat out Assault, obviously. If you're at 2, you can pull the spike, although even if you don't have Brutality to break it, so you don't have to wait till that's online to be able to... It eats spike. It doesn't matter where you're at.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not usually a card you're thinking about getting hit with when you play this, but it is certainly an option.
It is a delight. This is a delightful card to play range 3. You're losing to very unique specials, things like, to use some Exceed lingo, Whirls and Eyes. Whirls are attacks usually range 2 to 3 with speed 6 to kind of challenge those spaces. Eyes tend to be very quick poke attacks that have range 1 to 3 and speed 6 or 7.
Okay.
Those are usually big notable specials on a character's kit. Like one from the season he was from, if you look over at Propeller Knight, has a 1 to 3, 2 power, 6 speed option that he can.
Saber
Lunge. Saber Lunge.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
So you have to be wary of those cards, but in terms of fighting with the normals at range 3, this card is a joy. It beats everything that you have to worry about except your opponent crossing out, and we've already established that a cross down now is a benefit for Beheaded in the future.
Sure, yeah. I won't have to worry about it when I play Twin Daggers. So the way that you're describing it actually kind of sounds like how you're describing Dive Attack, not in terms of its use cases at all, but in terms of maybe how it might benefit from the traits, that like you don't really need much on it to make it super good. Like extra damage would be cool. But among the normals, like you're not trading when you play it. Putting tactics on it to make it hit from farther away. Like, tell me a little bit about what alchemy happens when you put traits on it, if any.
Well, when you put tactics on it, I think it just becomes oppressive because your opponent, usually when you're out to range 4, you're at this zone where people usually have two kinds of things. They'll have projectiles that may be range sensitive to whether they even hit at range 4, or they have fast approach options. Things like either having to play dive or having to assault in or play dive, something like dive attack. And occasionally you'll also have slow approach options, but those tend to be very range sensitive. So really you're using every part of the whip buffalo on this. If they're range sensitive, you pop them out 1. If you've stunned them, you might pull them in 1 to set up for a attack next turn.
Right.
But it range 4 just absolutely just again build this aura of pressure of threatening a copy of this becomes very potent. With survival, it becomes a weird crosscatch sometimes.
Yeah, I like it with survival for the same reason that I like dive attack with survival, which is I can use it what I really like it to set up positioning for my next strike. So like if I want them at closer to me because I want to get them in the range for a twin daggers the next turn, I can pull them that one in closer. If I have an infantry ball I really want to hit, I can push someone in a little bit faster. If I'm playing close range and I know they're trying to get the heck out of the way, if they throw a grasp, I will both still hit them, and I'll be able to pull them into range 2, which is the perfect range for twin daggers.
Right.
If you throw across, it's not quite as good because you can get all the way out. But a lot of times, if they're not necessarily, they don't have the room to run all the way away, and you have that extra range on it, you can get them just a little bit closer. Especially if you have the extra range on it, and you pull them in 1, your twin daggers will hit at 3 anyway. So you can get them right back into range both of those times for the follow-up, which tend to be. It's nice to have that little bit of defense and the range because then you can set up into, hey, you hit me. I played this what is seemingly an aggressive attack, but as a defensive way to set myself up for my next streak.
Right. And I mean I've definitely played cross at range 1 before where you know I'm you know if I'm threatening the grasp and wrenching whip with survival and tactics up beats grasp just fine. It would also beat cross just fine if you played it at 1 because you're still hanging out at range 4, you get pulled back in 1.
Yep.
So there's definitely some defensive utility there. With brutality, it looks like, I mean, this is an on-curve option, which means that power on top of it would be appreciated, but it doesn't look like no breakpoints change, really.
Yeah, I tend to see brutality on this as gravy rather than on because I use this card mostly for its utility in order to dodge something or to set something up for my next turn or going into me. The extra points is nice. And it's nice if they have a lot of guard 4s more than just the base hit normals. Like that's nice. One of my thought processes is why I might want more brutality than I already do, since power 3 doesn't break anything, basically.
Right.
But if they don't, it's not really helping me that much.
The biggest breakpoint that brutality gives you on wrenching whip is breaking defend boost.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So you're like, because everybody can get sort of a scuffed version of 4 guard with a boost because well everybody with the season 1 through 5 normal boost at least, or actually season 7 has it too, now that I think of it. A lot of characters are going to be able to get 4 effective guard. So okay, so wrenching whip having a little bit more ability to break that stuff is useful, especially if, as you mentioned, the normal that has 4 guard naturally is spike, and you have plenty of ways to beat it with just this card on its own. But not every 4 guard attack is gonna make that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, you can break Donkey Kick, you can break some Tatsus or something like that.
A lot of things have 4 guard, which is why it ends up being a relevant thing. But just normals.
Right. Okay.
So
that makes perfect sense.
And then we've got a boost that I think is a perfectly good boost. It's good. It's dependable. It's there when you need it. Beheaded is not a range 8 character. He's not a range 6 character, really. He's got like a one trait boosted attack that works at that range, and then sort of he's got a universal answer to being too far away in one of his ultras. But huge distance is usually going to be way better for the opponent who made it than Beheaded. He's a lot more confident at mid ranges or close. So just here's another move 3. It's not on cross. It's there when you need it. It'll get you out of the corner. Good old reliable dodge roll.
Yeah, it's solid. I like being able to move in. A lot of your stuff likes you want to be in Twin Daggers, other things. It's just nice to be able to close if they're too distance for you. You really can't. You're not super force hungry, but you can't really afford to. You don't have no draw, right? So being able to have an extra close in 3 or run away 3 if you want to set something up for one card versus for having to pay that manually is super nice, especially when your gauge is really expensive for you to spend. It's nice to have. He needs the movement. The movement is really, really solid, and it's on a card that I would usually use as a positioner anyway. So having its boost be a positioning boost feels nice to me because I'm not like, oh, I need the positioning, but in order to get the positioning, I'm throwing out my actual follow through card. It's nice that, to me, I like having it both on the same one because then I can use it and then use something else. That being said, I'm less likely to have it because it's all on one card, but I'm more likely to be able to pay it off.
Right. You don't have to make the choice between positioning and positioning, but you only have one copy of it because it's on one card. So there's a trade-off there.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing it's strictly 3. It's not up to 3. It's not quite like backstep or run. But so you're moving in a big chunk of 3 at a time. So you're winding up at a certain spot. So I'm assuming that a big part of playing this card is landing in a spot where you can threaten what's in your hand, because you can't really fine tune it the way you could with the normal boosts.
Yeah, true. 100%. And usually you want to move in a lot or a little because you're either backing up due to having your long range options live, like an infantry bow or tactics on another long range card. You're backing up for a big strike, or you are coming in because they pushed you all the way over here. So you need to jump a lot anyway. You don't necessarily, he doesn't hate the middle, but I often don't find myself desperately like trying to get out of.
Right. You're not really trying to. This isn't a micro spacing boost, and if it was, it would just be the same as discarding a card to move one if it doesn't have some other kind of like action compression. Honestly, it'd be like this. This is what you use for microspacing. Tornado.
Yes.
Move it exactly. Okay, dodge roll is your big macro movement.
Yep.
And he needs the macro movement. So it's nice. And I don't feel awful throwing it.
So we got a bow.
Yes. Tell me about infantry bow.
Yeah. So I want to so design note. Oops. For those of you who know Dead Cells, you might be like, hey, why is this the infantry bow when it gets bonus damage at range? Isn't that a different bow? And you're right.
Is it the mercenary bow, I think?
It's the marksman's bow.
Marksman's bow. It has an M.
So there was an early version of this bow that actually shotgunned and got bonus damage at range 1, and or was it either range 1 or range 2, like at the very inside of its range.
Right.
And they decided to shift away from that. It was either we started with marksman's, tried infantry, and then went back to marksman's, design-wise. But somehow along the way, infantry bow is what ended up on the card, even though the effect is marksman's, and it's even marksman's in some of the spreadsheets.
Interesting.
Whoops.
I did not know that. Playing this character has made me want to play Dead Cells, but I don't actually play Dead Cells. I feel like I would have been so upset if I had seen that, though.
That's really cool.
Of all the things in the world, it's not the end of it, but I will also say for your nightmare perusal, yeah, there was a version of this that had speed 5, So if you thought that opening mix-up was bad before...
Oh my god. So he had 2 above curve options in opening positions, 1 beats sweep, 1 doesn't.
Yeah.
That's scary.
As a move, don't move, it was obscene because he could also easily follow up one with the other.
Yeah, good point. Choose both.
And then look, you're at 2 gauge and the fun begins.
Right.
So...
Or even if you can't follow them up, it's twice as likely that you'll get it if there's 2 things.
Right.
That's true.
So
that's a good point.
As for the card itself, it is exactly the mediocre tool that he needs. Like the stat line is kind of mediocre. Even when we put traits on it, it's still kind of mediocre. When you hit with that rider, you get +2 power, brings you to 4. Obviously, having brutality on this, getting a ranged cash out that is unlikely to be traded back with for a 6 is great. But one of the things we will talk about sometimes in Exceed is fast fireballs versus slow fireballs.
Sure.
A lot of times, the model of a fast fireball will be something usually speed 4, maybe a little faster, that kind of pokes your opponent out, does a good solid 3 to 4 damage, and maintains that range. And then you'll have slow fireballs, which will tend to be speed 1 or 2, losing to dive if your opponent calls them out, but they'll have usually sizable power numbers like 5 or 6 and sizable guard numbers like 5 or 6. Right. And sometimes they'll even have really nasty effects on top of that for just saying how silly you were to run from me, you fool.
Right. Low tiger shot.
Exactly.
Right.
So this is thoroughly in the middle.
Yep.
It's not faster than fast. It's not slower than slow. There's no defenses on it unless you trade it, and even then, those defenses are not really enough to make this work in every situation. Tactics gives you that extra little space on it, but it's already 2 to 5. But when I say it's the tool he needs, he has a threat at 2 to 5. That's live. He has that becomes 2 to. Is not an unreasonable payout. It is something that if your opponent is like, I don't care that I've been wolf trapped, it's like, don't you? How
about 6 damage?
Right. It threatens a combination mix-up of move, don't move from starting positions that makes dive attack safer to play. It threatens a move, don't move with phaser that makes it easier to play. So he absolutely needs it. It's absolutely important that it's live, even though the stats are kind of meh.
Yeah, I agree with that. I find I don't end up playing it a lot of the time until maybe the end, when I've got it so it can tank a long range poke or does enough damage to be worth the payoff most of the time. So it rarely hits the field sitting in that middle ground of not super fast but not chunky. But yeah, 1,000% it needs to be there just for the threat, right? Like I don't end up using it most of the time. I'll use its boost sometimes just because I don't end up using it that much. But having it as a thing that exists makes it so much easier to play everything else. Right. Just having one copy up is so much better for the mind game.
And that speaks, Mad, way earlier in this lesson, you were talking about the value of your reshuffle. So if you play this as a boost and then one copy gets swept or something, or you use it as part of your mix-up and the other is a boost, or well, you just made 2 of your other cards worse, get that back online. Right? Make that a consideration again so that they can't just sweep all of your stuff coming in at that range.
Yeah. Right. Okay. They don't just see you initiate and say it's focus time. But I will also say, I think this boost is incredible. I think this boost is possibly even undercosted. And I think
on a lot of other characters, I actually have seen even 0 to 1 range sometimes costing a force. So that's interesting that you say that.
I think the biggest thing about this boost is the range is great, but the hit gain advantage is so good on this character in particular, and I'm not even just talking about twin daggers.
Right.
The ability to staple advantage onto the tool of your choice is really important for, like I said, that end game where you're trying to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, you can't boost, you can't move, you're not going to have a chance to make a decision. I'm going to play this out. There's, 11 power across 2 cards. You cannot deal with it.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Take 2 turns and win the game.
Right. And I think it's very important for enabling that. And so I think this is a boost that value increases significantly. It's good at the beginning if you're behind and you need to just land a hit while being evasive, and it's amazing as a part of your end game.
Mm-hmm. I also find it very funny because it's nice because when you throw it down, you threaten the range, which is essentially speed in a lot of cases. So you have a defensive option. You also have going into it, you have a really nice offense often if they let you keep it because you're setting up a plan. But if they can feel you're setting up a plan and they want to go, I have caught people trying. I like the advantage regularly from Amanda, but I've taken back advantage using this a couple times, more so than I can remember doing with a lot of other cards.
Oh god!
Just because most of the time
they'll play assault if you're at range 3 because they're like, okay, I'll at least go on curve. You just gave them the turn; they'll assault into you, but you play focus, and your focus has a range 1 or a speed 1 gain advantage.
Yes,
I just play.
And they're not expecting it.
I play sweep every time. And twice on weekends. You're not going to grasp it. You're not going to cross it. Right. You might spike it at the appropriate range. There, I might hesitate for a second, but just if they're forced to strike into you, you get the big meaty trade, and then you pick your punishment.
Right, and maybe you pull the card from their hand that they need to deal with the thing that you're about to hit them with or something.
Well, and you get the first turn up close, meaning if they're trying to close in because they need the positioning, they're willing to do a trade, but they'll know they connect, they'll know they'll get in, and then they get to follow up with whatever they needed. They don't get to follow up with whatever they needed now, so you can either capitalize with your short range hit like a truck, or you can get the hell out of there if they walked into you because they're Zangief and you don't want to sit next to them anymore.
Right, and it was their decision to come in, so clearly they want something by being there.
Yes, that's exactly totally. The thought process.
Totally.
Really, every element of this card is just hating on Zangief.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Question actually, so I'm seeing that the card is telling me to play it at range 4. Playing it at range 5 is cool too because I've got a threat that's live there. Is there?
Oh, it's 4+. It is not a sweet spot.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't even see that. Thank you. So forget everything I just said. However, is there any particular value in playing this at 2 or 3, or is that just like, well, Wild Swing consistency is a thing sometimes, and I would like a card to hit?
Well, you can cross catch again if you have survival on it and you think they're going to bounce out. Like you threaten, they think you're going to come in with the daggers. You threaten the infantry bow, they run the hell away, and now you hit them worse.
Yeah, you hit them at the sweet spot.
At the sweet spot, they'll run into it.
So the theme of this lesson overall, like here's how you play Beheaded, et cetera, this card just makes things a cross-catcher.
Yes, because you want them gone so you can fire your good lad.
Yeah, you put survival on anything in Beheaded's kit, and it turns into something that beats cross, it seems like.
Except for twin daggers. But by God, you want to scare them enough that they won't do it.
They won't do it anyway, sure.
Sometimes you need tactics, but yeah, that's, I think, one of the biggest merits of survival in general is making these specials safe against grasp and cross.
Yeah. And even if they won't throw you for grasp, like they'll be forced to pull you in if they wanted to throw you out. Now they have to pull you in, and usually if you played that, you wanted to be there.
Right, they probably don't want that. All right, cool, that makes perfect sense. All right, and finally,
speaking of,
yeah, we have Assault Shield, which I just as a quick editorial, going into this lesson, I was like, I get it. I probably get it. I have no idea what to do with Assault Shield. Somebody please help me out with this card. I don't see it.
I'm gonna help you out. You want to see how this card is great?
Yes, please.
I boost. Your turn.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, done.
Spike. You put a spike on it. You can EX it. You can put survival on it. it doesn't function without something else assisting it, but once something else is assisting it, you're having a great time.
Okay.
So design notes on this. There's two very notable things on this. One, there was a version with 3 base power. That was terrible.
Yeah.
And one of the first times in Exceed history where giving something more armor made it worse. There was a long time the stat line for this was tested at 1-3. 1 armor, 3 guard. Which you might be like, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is 1 armor, 3 guard plus brutality. This is a lot. Is a very large number. So dropping it to giving it 2 armor, 2 guard made its failure case better. It also made giving it the extra guard also made the sort of the final case of full Exodia Beheaded a little less scary because this didn't literally blow you off the map for 8.
It didn't beat everything in the whole game, right? So when you play this card with I don't know, survival and spike down, you're hitting for 6, right? You've got 1 power plus your maximum of 5 guard between your boost and your trait, and then you get brutality on top of that, correct? Okay, so this can actually get out of hand pretty quick.
Actually, it can hit like a truck.
In terms of just what's on the card, not printed power, but in terms of what power it gives you, that's hitting like almost Twin Daggers numbers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, wow. For sure. And you're really hard to break.
And beats Grasp out of the box.
Yep. So it's just a really, really slow tradie assault that beats lets you trade through things, lets you armor through things close up. Gets wild as soon as you put any sort of guard or power on top of it, or preferably both.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
It is notable in this case. It's tactics you need to make this a cross-catcher.
Not survival. You just need survival for everything else about this card.
Right.
Yeah.
But you need tactics to catch cross.
Gotcha.
Or they need to be in the corner.
Right. It is a risky card to play unless it's backed. Once you have at least survival behind it, or you can boost behind it, this is such a great range 1 play that beats so many things and is guaranteed to trade up. The only time I don't like playing this card is if I have had a really rough early game.
Yeah, if you don't have the life to trade for it.
Oh, I see. Okay. Not necessarily because you don't have the traits down anymore. It's just that, okay,
you will get punched.
We're closing in on the late game. Both of our life totals are low. This might actually just kill me even if I hit with it, it might just kill me.
Yeah. You have 3 armor, but if they call it and they think, oh, I know what you're doing, and they hit you for 8 or they hit you for 9 and that's enough.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
Or hit you with a big dumb ultra.
Ultra, yeah.
Yeah.
And I like how he specified 1 there, because what eats it is spike.
Sure, yeah, because it's slow even if you EX it, and as you mentioned, EXing it gives you the boost as well to the armor. It's still not catching spike, so play it at range 1 in particular.
Or if you have that tactics range 4, it's quite cute at range 4.
Right. So when you are when you're putting survival on it, you're winding up with 2 guard plus 2 guard is 4 guard. So you can still get a little tiny bit more out of it by EXing it still. You'd get an additional 2 power out of the EX at that point, or if you put down defend. Oh, actually, defend maxes it out on its own. There actually is a difference in survival and defend. Okay, that's good to know. So this kind of maxes out this card, and then any sort of power you have on top of it. All right, I completely undervalued this card. That is a brutal hit, and that's cool.
And anything for Beheaded, if you really need to, if it's a little bit chunky, you can just, and they're not going to hit you like a truck, you can get a gauge out there.
Okay, yeah, even
it's a little bit easier too.
Sure, that makes sense.
Right, or if you wind up with survival early, and you can get something on the board. Right. It justifies it a little bit more because it's both adding survival to everything else, but making this a little bit more chunky.
Right.
Seeing one of these in my hand makes me far more likely to pick this than I otherwise would be.
Right, because then you're able to confirm your next gauge more easily just by trading into it, and you're trading better. And also, it seems like this is a trait that that +1 armor in one strike is not that much, but over an entire game of trading slightly better, I mean, Ragna has that through his life gain, right? That's a serious advantage of being able to just always take one less damage. So the faster you get this online, the better. It's just an opportunity cost between the other two.
Yeah.
Especially if you are willing to, and I don't know if Mad does this as much as I do, but I am fully willing to eat something through the face if it gets me what I want. Like if I know I'm going to get the position that I want and a gauge for him, but I'm going to take a bunch of damage. Sometimes I'll just take the damage. My life is a resource, and this extends that resource for me.
That makes sense.
If it gets me going faster to either be faster than them in the charge or just to the place I need to be to not get womboed, I'll do it.
I
have a lasting gain.
I think the important thing about that is if it gets you the gauge and positioning, and that speaks back to one of that first thing of like the behead who's just like I just have to hit. Okay, you played infantry bow turn 1. Oh, well, you were super cheeky, had the second copy. You played the other one turn 2. You are now at range 4, and infantry bow is gone. Your opponent now knows this, and yes, you still have die of attack, but you're starting to reach a point where you're like, okay, can I really keep my opponent from running from me? I think that like the biggest difference between sort of the skill floor of Beheaded and the next level is making those plays that don't just hit, but hit, and even if you don't trade up in life, because it's hard to play this card naked. It's hard to play Assault Shield naked. But Koronair was saying, like sometimes it's essential, but I definitely want to make sure if I'm not getting the damage out of it, I'm getting the spacing out of it, because
absolutely.
On that turn your opponent, wailed on you and you trudged in with Assault Shield and soaked 2 of it. Maybe that puts you at range 2. Maybe it's dagger time.
No, absolutely, because it is positioning that makes him go burr, because he isn't. You can get good at one thing, you can get good at many a thing, or be really good at the thing they're bad at. But what makes you really good at things is being in the spot that you are at. He's so positioning heavy to make sure that he stands where because his tools are so different and so designed to be picking at different weak points, that getting yourself into their weak point spot or getting yourself to the spot you need to be for your next tool that you have at the time is so important, because you're not a good wild swinger because your cards don't all hit at the same time. You cannot go to range 3 and just slam all your cards and know that something will work. For Beheaded, it can be really, really bad to be at a certain. He can be good at any range, but he can be really bad at any range too. So you want to make sure that where you're going, you plan around getting yourself to where you need to go, because you don't have the cards to move yourself there, except for like the Wrenching Whips, Advance and Retreat. Like you've got some movement cards, but they're your specials, and you're not going to be drawing many cards. So using your strikes to gain the gauge, but positioning especially is so important. It's not about just tapping; it's landing.
And so you're, as to add on to the sort of general play pattern conversation we had near the beginning of this lesson, the things that you're being limited by are your economy, and finding places to get more cards to fuel your engine, and your positioning that you're trying to leverage your threats, which makes sense to me.
And I think just to tap one thing onto that, because I completely agree. And I think that's also why it's important that, like I was saying, that you try to hide some of his options or keep them live as threats. Because even being able to say this might not be Wrenching Whip, it might be Assault, as you go into the late game, or threaten a fast slow on top of Twin Daggers. Like when you play these cards face up, they're good. They're great with certain traits. But other characters can do way more dishonest things with some of their Exceed cards.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's like infantry bow. I never want to see it until the end of the game. With exceptions, I hate getting it in my hand because I'm like I got a dead card in my hand, or I can make it work for me, but now they know this is out. And
Right,
I'd
and
much rather have it be in my deck as a threat and something that I can get into later when I have more charge on it than early versus a lot of my other specials.
I'll take it from opening positions, but it depends on the matchup again.
Yeah, the matchup definitely depends there.
And even the boost on it, you were talking about it as being a particularly good late game boost. So you can't, it's not even a situation where you're like, well, this card would be an amazing attack in the late game, but I'll play it as a boost early on. It's good as a late game boost too.
I think it's also fine early. Like if I was in a certain strange matchups, I could even see boosting this from opening positions to be like,
you could totally do that. Yeah, I was gonna say you could boost it opening, and now all of a sudden you hit from across the board with a lot of things.
Yeah, definitely. And we talked a little bit. I'm sorry to jump back to Assault Shield really fast. We talked a little bit about Corrupted Power already as being like, this is your breakpoint math card. This is the thing that you play it when you are trying to hit a very specific thing. It's not an econ boost. Is there anything else to mention about Corrupted Power as a boost before we hop over to the ultras?
I think we've said most of. Maybe Mad can add on something that I forget. But I think we've said most of what needs to be said here, which is I would use it not for greed but for breakpoints, and just be careful because you. With how I think you've seen this conversation goes, your plan is so important, and getting your tools are so specific and so varied that throwing out a random card can hurt so bad because you might only have you go here and you accidentally throw out infantry bow. You're like, all right, I'm ready. I'm sitting this. I'm gonna get this on here because I've got an infantry bow that they can't stop, and I'm just gonna add 2 more power onto it, and all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm chilling out at range 5. Nothing's gonna stop me now. Oh, I have been stopped.
I've been stopped.
Hold on though. Not only have you been stopped, you stopped yourself.
Yes.
Right? Your opponent didn't do a thing to earn that card, that crucial card discard. You just did it.
Sometimes discarding is worse than even showing your hand, because even with your hand revealed, you can stare at your opponent and say, is it dive attack? Is it infantry bow? Who knows?
Right.
You know, at range 3 you can be like, is it dive attack? It's a wrenching whip. Let's play the game. If they know you have both, these are both threats. If this is gone, all of a sudden this looks way worse.
Yeah,
right.
It's you do it for a specific reason. Be your closer to 0 life points. Be your break on something that wouldn't. Otherwise, it's corrupted power. It's not. Otherwise, it can burn you really bad.
Right. I guess that's why it's called that. All right. That makes perfect sense to me.
Talk about these ultras.
Yeah, tell me about these ultras, please. You've been eyeing these all conversation, I think, Mad. Tell me about Phaser first. Unless there's a specific reason to talk about Wave of Denial first instead. I'll let you go.
The reason to talk about Wave of Denial is if we were saving dessert to the end, but I think if we're talking game plan, we have to talk about Phaser.
Okay.
So design notes. Goodness. So there was very important text that was on one of the first versions of Phaser. This says, play this continuous boost and sustain it. That used to say sustain your boosts.
Oh no.
Mm-hmm. Furthermore, to make this even worse, Phaser used to have power 1.
Okay,
now
so you could put I guess you could chain them back to back then.
Yes.
You could put a lot of stuff on that.
You could play Phaser from across the board. First of all, you could back off, boost fierce, boost light. Yep. Did your opponent challenge your boost? Maybe they were at range 8, maybe they didn't have a card. Cool. You play Phaser. You're in for, say you have brutality up, you're in for 5 damage and advantage. And now you have +6 power, +2 speed. Go ahead, play the second Phaser. Right. Awesome. Advantage again. Play twin daggers. Your opponent
game's over.
explodes.
Yeah, you lost a friend in real life.
Yes. Your opponent is, again, to use the magic term, tapped and attacking across the table at you.
Yes.
But
so that's why we didn't do that.
And I think the it having one power on it and going from one power to NA is also a very important change for why you can't boost behind it, get the cash on the way in, and then a further payout when it gets there.
Right. You're not hitting. You're not getting. You're not. Cashing out with the boost you already put down. That makes
and you're
sense.
not getting free damage from brutality either. Like
no,
right.
The brutality is what makes it live.
Like it makes it a lot more. Well, brutality doesn't affect this at all. NA stays NA. +2 does not. This is not 0.
It's not 0. It can't hit. It would be like putting Fierce on block.
Yeah, the attack hits.
Interesting.
Another example of this kind of a card is Arakune has a card that is range 1 power NA.
Right.
With a very important hit effect because it also matters for Arakune. He hit with a special. He goes overdrive. This card goes to gauge. All of that. This card does care whether it hits, but it cannot gain power. And I think that was a very important and very good change to it. We talked about how important positioning is, and this tool makes an nothing personnel kid mockery of the concept of positioning. I will also say there was an iteration of this with 5 guard base, which made it comedy hour safe to play. Like you just
even against like big projectiles from across the board, like you could just armor through whatever you wanted.
If you had survival up against ultras, it didn't even really matter.
Right, you just coming in. Yeah,
you were in. You had to go. So it was hit a couple of times. I think it's a lot more reasonable now. What is this tool for? 1, this is your positioning fixing tool. This is this is the wrong neighborhood. I have to get out of here.
Right.
Often
why am I at range 8? I don't want to be at range 8.
I don't want to be at range 8. I also would be like, I'm at range 5. I have no bows. I have no dive attacks. I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Right.
It is also
I'm sorry to interrupt. That speaks to what you were talking about earlier about keeping this threat live to mask this, to say that, well, no, it's not guaranteed to be phaser. It could still be infantry bow because I still have an infantry bow live.
Right, and that makes the approach a lot safer because it still is not pleasant to play this into sweep. Like that hurts.
Totally.
You feel bad.
They pull your copy of Twin Daggers.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is also notable that it's close and then jump behind your opponent. So in most cases, you're going to end up the one cornered instead of them.
Right.
So all of that stuff we said about love your opponent being in the corner, hate cross, even stronger when you use phaser. And then there's the other half of this card, which is +4 power. What can we say about +4 power?
It's delicious.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a big number.
Yummy.
It is a very large number, and it is, I think, part of the key of that end game. This is your tool to make these traits really pay out. If you have this +4 power on the board, these plinks have turned into decent hits. They've grown up. They've got brutality behind them. They're feeling good, but that infantry bow for 6,
4 more power good.
Yeah, infantry bow for 6, got him, buddy. Infantry bow for 10. What match are we playing next?
Yeah, that's a big difference. Is that ever worth playing raw as a boost, or is the upside of having another turn and being able to play it for free with phaser kind of just makes it always something that you would want to attack with?
The cost is not as bad as it seems force-wise, because if you are paying this, it's very notable. This is a ultra that hits and then goes into play as a boost.
Definitely,
now,
yes.
This is net -1 gauge, absolutely. So in theory, the hard cast cost, to use that term, is the same.
It's about the same. It could come from somewhere other than gauge, I guess. That's the only difference. Right.
And it has the significant disadvantage of I just passed the turn to my opponent with this boost on the board. They're going to tech it, or they're going to diffuse it, or they're going to try to do something about it. That's the real advantage of being like, I put this into play, and I'm guaranteed to get a turn to act on it.
That's exactly what it is.
Right. And phaser is safe enough that you're not really risking a whole lot by again, you don't want to get swept, stuff like that. But like 4 speed, 4 guard in a neutral game without boosts in play, that's actually pretty safe. Like,
you say that EX dive exists and will make you so sad.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And if they're holding at the same time though, if they're holding EX dive for this, they also have the text in hand, so you can't play it as a raw boost anyway in that situation because they would just tech it. Okay.
It is the tech bait boost of his kit. And the benefit of that is speaking back to the boost war thing, is it does make your opponent less likely to tech your lights, to tech your defends, because they're like, what if Giant Killer comes out behind that? Right. But I would say in some ways this is less threatening than a boost like Way of the Warrior and Ryu, because 2 power and 2 speed make a combination that's like, I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to threaten you above curve at the same time. Right. This is, I'm going to hurt you as soon as I catch you.
Yeah. You're gonna, and it's a bigger payout, but it's not actually doing much to make that payout more likely to happen.
Right, exactly. It gives them the turn. You don't have the time to follow up on it. He is so finicky in the sense where, hey, if you have the infantry bow and they walk in, you can't shoot them with it anymore. You might not have a good follow up. You might have lost it. Or if you're out of your long range options, they might have walked away from it. That follow up on the next turn is so huge with the follow up and the positioning, because you're in the spot you want to be. You get the chance to go. You can hit them like a truck, and you can hit them like a truck in a way where they can do absolutely nothing about it with certain EXs.
Right.
I will say the other situation where I'll hard cast this is when I think I can make my opponent scared, that I can get 2 turns out of it. Because obviously, if I just wanted cards, I would just change cards this. But if I think I can get like a prep and still have an answer, and maybe get a second prep to really reload, this is a great intimidation card.
Okay. In the same way that this you were talking about the exceed side being an opportunity to reload if you can. +4 power is just going to make somebody not willing
Who
to
wants to interact with +4 power?
Right.
Raise your hands out there.
Right. Okay. That makes total sense.
Potemkin player, I see you in the back. That's fine. Everyone else, you can leave.
You can leave. All right. So tell me about, unless there's more to talk about for phaser, talk to me about Wave of Denial.
Well, I think something that must be mentioned explicitly. It was mentioned in vague before, but the most delightful thing that you can do with phaser. I was waiting to see if he mentioned it, which I know he had earlier. Is if you can phaser into twin daggers or into an EX twin daggers, and then it's if you EX it, you literally can't be stopped. You're on curve range 1, hits for half your life.
Yeah, that's a ultra that costs a lot more than 1 gauge.
Yeah,
3, 5, 7, 11. A nice 1 to 2, 11, 7, 12, 7. Yeah. Sorry, forgot the EX power.
7. Yeah.
A lovely season 1 stat line that none of us can forget.
Yep.
Yeah. It just needed a special shout out because it's,
of course, yeah. I mean, like, I can't think of too many cards. I can't think of too many cards in Exceed that wouldn't benefit from having +4 power on them. Like, Grasp beating Sweep sounds pretty good, but Twin Daggers is ridiculous without that. Without Giant Killer. Giant Killer Twin Daggers is pretty scary.
This is actually my favorite will they won't they if I don't have the EX. Because this is Grasp check and Assault Shield is the thank you so much for playing Grasp.
For playing Grasp. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, if this is behind traits, it doesn't quite start from a Twin Dagger's number. But if you're this with 2 traits is let's see.
Still brutal.
Yeah, 1, 4, 1, 5, 7. That's another 11. So yeah, they also just died.
So that's also ridiculous. And again, we're talking about this as kind of a late game payout thing.
Mhm.
But at the same time, late game payout normally means, all right, you got 6 life left, the game is over. You're saying you got 11 life left, you got 12 life left, the game is over anyway. So late game means something different for Beheaded than it does for most characters, it sounds like. It happens faster than you think.
And that's was one of the reasons why I sometimes like that little 2 points of chip damage, just because when your opponent realizes they can just die,
right?
Few people have the calm mind to look into the face of death and play the right thing.
Or
People
if they don't realize they just die, they can not play this. They can make a silly move, not realizing that was the last strike.
Right. That you have checkmate and there's nothing they can do about it unless they acted right then and they didn't know.
And I will say, like, as much as he doesn't have ignore guard option, when you hit someone for 11 and they block, unless they were so far ahead of you on resources,
right,
you're still winning. They're just not dead.
Sure.
That being said, I also want to talk about the other amazing way of ending this game, and that is, I love this card. I love this card. This card's so good. This card did get tweaked a few times. There was a version that had base range. There's a version that had less power. There was a version where Spartan Sandals was free. That was actually really silly in terms of checkmate setup, because he could play this, wall bounce you without significant expenditure, and then basically set you up a checkmate from further away. It's still quite a situational but very good boost. It's hard to justify spending Wave of Denial on it without the rider, but let's talk about this attack. 127, that may not even seem that inspiring. You're like, 127, I get that from Grasp, and push 3, that's okay positioning for me.
Right.
This is an Ultra. All of these apply Wave of Denial.
Right. So this could be a 1 to 2 4/7. That's actually hitting
4/7 that wall bounces for a 1 to 2 6/7 for 1 gauge.
Right. That's a lot.
Or even just a 1 to 2/7 is, hey, you're the move you thought you were guaranteed to work isn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what's Cammy has a 127. Cannon Spike.
Cannon Spike, which even has a push 3.
Yeah, it's the same. It's a grasp that beats sweep for 2 damage, except that you have a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can turn this into.
I think tactics is probably the most important to make this, as we call a true DP.
Yes.
Speed curve aggressively at close range. You thought you were on curve at 6. Aha! I caught you out at 7. At a range greater than 1.
So Matt, your audio cut out there for a second there in the middle of your explanation. You were talking about the relationship between speed and range.
Right.
Right.
So being able to challenge speed 7, beating the normal fast thing at range 2, speed 6.
Yeah.
Very important. But I just can't express how good this is as a game-ending tool. You maybe you land that trade and your opponent blocks. Maybe you land a trade and things are close. But especially once this has traits behind it, I think this is one of the ones where tactics is the most important. But it still works just fine at range 1 if you don't. It's very powerful. It covers Twin Daggers in a delightful way. It's friendship ended with Grasp. Wave of Denial is my new best friend. Shaking hands with Twin Daggers. And 1 to 2, 6, 7 is a nutty stat line. It's a nutty stat line for 1 gauge, even on a character as greedy as Beheaded. And like I said, I think this is the other end game for him, is either behind this tool as a threat or just using this tool to just slam your opponent in the wall and knock him to pieces. And don't remember, this kit still has Giant Killer in it.
Yeah, so this is this can be your cash out too. This isn't a detour from your game plan. This can be the end game of everything that you've been working towards. Twin Daggers is awesome to close out a game, but you do have other cards, and this is a really, really good way to finish things off.
I will also say it is a combo that is disruptible, especially by slows, but if you know your opponent is low or out of those, playing Knife Dance, and just because, as opposed to Phaser, this does go to Gauge. So this is Gauge neutral. Like, that's one of the things to remember. This is Gauge neutral. Pay to Gauge. If it hit, you get that Gauge back. And it's very unlikely you're going to play this where it's really not going to hit. Maybe a range 1 dodge or something really esoteric comes out.
Right.
So this is Gauge neutral. If you can tack advantage on this, you just boot your opponent in the wall, they come back, you boot them again. And you may not have gotten that 10 damage in 1 swing, but you probably got 12 in 2.
Right. Because 6 is plenty of damage. Or brutality plus the wall bounce or whatever you're hitting with. You're hitting hard.
Right. And that's my opinion on the card. Again, Koronair, you might feel very differently about it. I love this card.
No, I love this one too. I think it's really solid in the sense that it can be the finisher if you want it to be, if you have the setup in place. It's got the speed, it can be above curve, it can add up, you can use it as a finisher if you want to, but it's also super solid on its own just as exactly what it says. It is a wave of denial. Hey, you thought you were doing this? No, you're not. Hey, you thought you were doing this? No, you're not. Get you out of jail free card in so many circumstances, which is just super lovely to have, and even more lovely to threaten. They know that you have it and they want to do their big combo, but they're worried that they can just get pushed or booped or whatever, because it doesn't just have, it's nice that it has two different ways of blocking attacks. It is both fast, so you are speedy. You can be speedy, you can be above curve at range 2. You have twice the amount of grasps, so even if it isn't necessarily above curve at range 1, by the time you get through a bunch of your deck on both sides, a lot of times people will run out of grasps. You will have them live theoretically longer because you have 2 more grasp likes. So you are on curve at range 1 for a lot longer. You're above curve at range 2, and not only just quick poke because you could play a slow thing, but if it isn't like focus and can't be pushed or pulled and isn't a very long range card, all of a sudden they're over here. And most things can handle being pushed 1 or 2, but most things cannot handle being pushed 3.
Right.
Unless they're specifically designed to catch across. A lot of things that they were throwing at 1 can't handle being at 4, or things you're throwing 2 being at 5 now.
Right. And or, you, as Matt was saying, so the other use case is you wall bounce him for more damage. But you're saying even just get away from me, your stuff doesn't work the way you thought it does, is a totally valid use case as well, especially because it's only 1 gauge. It's not a super expensive ultra, and you might be catching their expensive ultra.
Yes. A gauge neutral card to catch their expensive ultra into not murdering you, I'd pay for that every time.
Sure.
Yeah, I will say 2 things about this. Is 1, when you boot them out 3, as long as you have cards in hand, it doesn't matter if you don't actually have infantry bow or dive attack. You can pretend that you do, and they have to deal with that universe. And especially in the universe where they played sweep into this, and they're really sad. And the other thing I was just gonna of note, in the late game, this is one of the few things that I will do. If I've got this, I will sometimes wait until I have 3 gauge to exceed, because putting this behind +1/+1.
Oh, sure. Okay.
now it's really just go away, and the threat of it is just like
Right. You're above current range 1.
Yeah, they literally have to come at you with an EX to make this a thing.
Right, and you'll know that if you're there initiating.
And yeah, you
don't
play
just
away
don't
from
play
denial
the card. Right? Yeah, you're fine. All right, cool. So that makes sense. And then we discussed Spartan Sandals briefly. But it seems like the opportunity cost of not having Wave of Denial, that is such a good cleanup card and also such a good get off me tool. I'm assuming that the use case here is Beheaded loves a cornered opponent. It's another way to confirm Twin Daggers for lethal or something like that.
You can confirm Twin Dagger. You can create spacing. I will like wall bouncing an opponent. It's hard to justify playing to put them from range 1 to range 2 unless the end of the deck is very specific. Right. But I will absolutely wall bounce people to range 3 if I know I have oppressive tools, like I have tactics Twin Daggers up, or I have 2 wrenching whips in hand, and I'm just going to make you unhappy.
Right.
It is matchup specific, but the fact that you can typically wall bounce into a very safe strike afterward is I think the real value of this. It is expensive though. You're spending an ultra and a force to get that free strike. You better make it worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
I also find it's just nice to have a card that can move the opponent, because it's much harder to move them than it is to move you. Sure. So if you've got Vega, hey, get just like, that's push. It's not a push, but if they won't move, if they're locked down and you need them to be over here and you're not, or if you want to prevent them from crossing out, if you can start getting them to the other side of the board, you can follow. Or if you don't have something that will jump over them, but you can just run,
right,
you can get them over here and then move out.
It never even occurred to me that Spartan Sandals, there's no range on it. It's a boost. It's push 2. You could push 2 from here if you wanted.
Yeah.
It's not like Wave of Denial it has a range to it. Spartan Sandals, you can just say, go over there.
Go over there now.
Okay.
Am I desperately need you not at this range right here, right now, or I die? Right. Go over there.
Yeah, so it's way more flexible than I gave it on first read, because it's not something that you need to. It's not like quick backdash on Sagat where you're at range 1, now you're at range 3. It's you can push them wherever you want to be.
Right. If they're here and you're here, you can go. Okay, you're here now, and it's very well.
So sure. Worth noting, this went from there was a version where this was 0 force. It went from the most powerful version of this was 0 force, push up to 3.
Oh yeah, that's a lot.
Especially because the push was selective. Then it became push up to 2, and that was still too good because getting to pick your range was
is really powerful.
Yeah, and so then it became flat push 2. So worth noting that this card, this used to be a lot sillier. I think right now it's probably fair, but could stand to be better than it was. I think one of the final versions did have this as up to 2, and I think it just went to 2 to print.
Right. Well, key by base, right? You push them out of, without tactics, you push them out of range of Twin Daggers.
Right.
If you're at one.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the Beheaded kit. That's the cards.
That's the kit. Awesome. All right. So I'm looking at our time here, and we've just crested over 2 hours.
Wow.
Which is awesome.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. This is great. I'm really enjoying it, and I think our viewers will too. So before I ask you guys about, counterplay, and how to stop Beheaded from doing beheaded things, any other kind of like gameplay wide considerations that we should be talking about? We talked a little bit about where your cards are coming from, when you can prep, how you can keep your engine going, why that's important. We talked about positioning. Any other little bits and pieces of the Beheaded game plan that we need to cover before we move on?
I would say that we answered the big 5 questions. For those skipping to the end, are determine if you're the aggressor in the matchup. Check yourself to see if you're being predictable with the cards you're putting down. Are you just playing on curve because you just want to hit? Cover that twin daggers with a spike every now and again to keep your opponents honest. Are you being predictable in what's left in your deck? Did you lose your options? Do you need to go get them back to threaten them? Find your moments to get your resources back, even if that means throwing your ultras away and then reshuffling for them. And have a plan to win the game, because given everything, these starting stats and power numbers do mean you're probably going to be below your opponent until you're very ahead of them. So figure out what your end game looks like and execute. And sometimes save a gauge before flipping, because, like I said, having wave of denial on the flip side is
really, really scary.
It's fun. It's real fun.
Yeah.
Try it out.
Quote unquote fun.
Quote unquote fun.
Yeah. Koronair, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a solid understanding of the basics. I guess for me, it's look, don't get too focused in your own head about your own plan. You are very much, these are tactics, and you want to have a strategy, but these are tactics, not strategies. You need to be able to respond to what is going on in the moment and to how they fight and what their cards are. You should not be focused solely on your own long-term game plan of what do I want? What do I want here? Here's what I want to look like. This is the cards that I want to pull into at the end of the game. This is the order I want my tactics to come in, because then you're going to get stuck up in your head that maybe you'll get there, but he is not necessarily, his cards can be really tough, but he's not necessarily so strong because of any single particular combination of things, but because he's really good at becoming what they cannot handle. So just figure out what the tactics are for who you're versing, both as a person and as their exceed character functions, and be willing to play off of that and play off of what's in your hand, more so than how you idealize or want the game to go. You are not a one game plan character. Your game plan is to make your game plan as you go.
Sure. So Mad, to add a sixth question to your list there, maybe it's am I remembering that Exceed is a 2-player game?
Absolutely.
And I'm
like
responding
that
to my opponent here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay.
You are not Minato playing Celtic.
Right. No. And also, I mean, like it's also worth mentioning that, like, Mad, all of those questions that you're asking, many of them can just be asked about Exceed in general. Like, like you're playing, in order to win with Beheaded, you're playing good Exceed. It's just that the shape of your good Exceed game is a little bit different and a little bit skewed in certain directions than it is for other characters.
Yeah. First of all, it's sealed deck Legos, completely different from stat Legos. But it's worth noting that I have brought Beheaded to tournament, and I have never ever had good results with him. He's paid me back for my cube. He is, every time I have played Beheaded in tournament, he has disappointed me, or I've disappointed him.
One of the two.
That's so sad.
So
I've won 2 with him, so we can get 2 in the books. But he's newer. He was my replacement when season 2 rotated out. As you can tell where I was coming from I'm originally a Taisei player. So if that makes any of what I said makes sense. I needed someone without a head, okay? Someone who grows and someone with no head.
Yeah, you only play characters who don't have a head or lose their head throughout the game. All
my mains are headless boys. That's it.
You're required to pick tails every time you coin flip.
You
but
you can't fit heads. Oh my god.
I think
right, so
I think that just to kind of close on that last thought is he's absolutely very fundamentals based. He's he is a bit of a Shoto archetype compared to like Ryu, but I think he's got a very low skill floor in how he can sometimes just blow people up with very large numbers. If 2 players are both playing at a kind of a very basic understanding of the game, this character seems unfair. I think as his skill ceiling is I don't even know if I want to say it's not as high as other characters, because I think that there is room for it, but a lot of them are these long-term game decisions about things like economy, about what trait to take, about how they're going to approach the matchup, and how the last 15 cards of your deck are going to treat you after the first 15 are gone.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I'd agree. Low floor, I'd say medium ceiling on terms of his own kit. But I would say to get the most out of him, it's a higher someone who's more experienced will get more out of him, because you are so, compared to other characters who want to run their kit in a very, very specific way and do their own thing and not be disrupted. He benefits off of having a lot of knowledge of how other characters work when you fight them. So the more you know about other like Exceed characters and how they function and how to disrupt different types of deck, like being able to look at a character and be like, oh, I know you do this. I need to make sure I'm not at these ranges and I can adapt myself to that. He has better adaptive principles, so you can better apply the knowledge that you have about other characters versus playing someone who can't necessarily. You might know you don't want to sit at a certain range, but if you're Zangief and you know you're like, oh, he doesn't like he wants me to be at 1. I want to be at 1. You just go there anyway, right? So like he can actually apply a lot of that counterplay knowledge more than most people can. So I think you can get a lot of value out of both knowing more characters and being able to sight read their cards. Like look at the reference card. What range is their most common range on their card, right? Like we're understanding those breaking points, knowing what range is most common to their character, seeing how much damage they do on average, or being like, okay, I know their gameplay is going to end them up in this spot. Here's the point where I need to push this, but like I need to have a button to push when this goes off. I need to make that button. I can spend my game making sure I have an option for their super ultra that they've been charging up the whole time. Just being able to sight read or understand what other people do, I think you can get a lot of value with him specifically over certain other characters. While his own mechanics aren't necessarily crazy complicated on their own.
Yeah, so the difficulty is kind of gain or exceed wide, not necessarily just controlling your character. You're not making incredibly complicated decisions, but you are reacting, and you need to have good sense of what you're reacting to.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Anyone has to do that, but him especially, you can, if you understand how your opponent's character works and how your opponent as a person thinks, you can capitalize a lot with him specifically versus a lot of other characters who are not necessarily going to let you counterplay and punish as hard.
Got it.
You're playing a long game for the privilege of going unga bunga, I throw daggers.
Well said.
Yes.
That makes sense. Okay, and a good opponent is going to make you play that long game very carefully.
Yeah.
Okay, so we sort of we touched on it in kind of a backwards way just now, but so Mad, you've never won a tournament with Beheaded. Clearly, your opponents knew something about how to fight Beheaded that you couldn't deal with. So what are they doing to stop you from doing your Beheaded stuff? And then you, as the Beheaded player, how are you counterplaying their counterplay?
To be brief on it, when his options become limited, when his cards become obvious, especially when they don't have these good numbers behind them, he just becomes so much weaker. If your opponent is like, we're here, he's gonna phaser, it's his only option, this card just got a lot weaker. When we're here, and there's a threat of a mix-up between phaser and bow, and maybe I have a boost out such that it feels more threatening, then it's different. I think sometimes I fell into the trap of playing him like I used to, when it was just a question of, I hit critical mass, I'm going to play this combo together, my opponent bursts into flames. And those numbers, as we went through, aren't there anymore. Some of these cards are very difficult to play without the traits behind them. And you're an opponent who there's every Exceed player goes to the point where they play a game, they start the game, they play dive, and their opponent's like, oh yeah, dive +1. You're like, I didn't know you had that. And that has a knowledge check moment. He is a little bit of a knowledge check character in that respect, but because he has a tool for all seasons. But I think the number one way to put pressure on Beheaded is make him pay for his gauge, keep the life totals close as you can, and when options go down, exploit them.
Okay.
If I was going to parry a card in this kit, I would honestly probably parry either Twin Daggers or Wave of Denial.
Okay.
And the other thing is, because his economy is kind of bleh, you can exploit times he's at low hand, or especially late. You can usually set up a reading on him, which is the other big thing that he can end up eating. If when life totals are close at the end of the game, if you force him to take 5 or 6 unanswered because you forced him to play a no normal as the deck was getting low, all that life you got back from survival is gone, and now the game is not in good shape. So I think you exploiting his bad economy, and like I said, exploiting when his options are down, to not respect the mix-ups anymore, is the way to beat him.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can also look at, depending on the person, I mean, if it's someone who plays, I play brutality, tactics, survival, every time, no matter what. And if you know that, okay, you can't look at this, but a lot of times too, you can look at what they're taking for their traits and be like, why? Why did you put that here? Hey, I'm playing Noelle with 3 power on a bunch of things. I guess if you jump over, I'm playing a character that's got a lot of really low little hits that will be able to be tacked by survival. But the first thing you put on the board is brutality or whatever. Or I'm playing someone who would be hurt really badly by the range, but you put survival on the board first. Why do you do that? If it's not in response to me, what does it say about what your plan is or what's in your hand because you picked this first?
Right.
You can try and read a little bit about what that means.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense.
Right.
And if you're in the opposite position and they do just do that in every order every time, well, that's exploitable too, right? Like you can like you're to go back to Mad's point, you're making yourself more predictable by doing that. So even when you're not doing that, even when you are being reactive, you're giving information away.
Absolutely. You can either exploit the fact that that they're not fully adapting to you, so they're not getting the most capital out of how they can beat you down the most, or they might be telling you a little bit about either what they've seen from you or what's going on in their hand or their plan. Same way with some of these boosts. It's like they can just be good in general, but most of them, to really be worth playing the card and using the turn for, you're like, okay, what does this mean you have? Did you put this, you're at range 2, you put this out there, you've probably got a grasp. Why? Why did you put this here? Right? Especially for some of his more specific options, it's revealing to you which of his specials he might actually have. And once you know that, when he goes to throw, hey, is this a wrenching whip at range 4 or a infantry bow with the tactics? If you've kind of learned a little bit about what he's got hidden based on his things, you know how to call the mix-ups. And he's not going to leave. He's not generally going to, at least I don't think he should, just throw boosts to throw boosts. He's going to throw boosts with intention, right? Because if you throw boosts to throw boosts, you don't have the card resources for that. So because you have to put intention behind setting something up, you can have that very same intention read to be countered.
Yeah, I think compared to someone like, say, Ken, who has economy and goes in one direction, the problem with Beheaded's mix-up game is not that it's good. It's not that it's not good. It's that the risk-reward can be skewed. Yeah. If you stand at range 5 and you threaten the wrenching whip versus spike mix-up, you play the spike. Sometimes they just wild swing and assault, and you feel like a dummy because you were trying to pressure them. So I think he plays more honest than most when his options are live. But sometimes you are going to have to use the pressure of the card, whether or not you have it, use the pressure of its existence into getting your opponent to play something and to sneak something in, to sneak in that spike, to sneak in that dive, to close the gap, grab the gauge, be greedy, and win the game.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you gotta take risks. You can't
play the line.
No, if you don't think your opponent understands how you function or how it works, you can play the line. You'll be all right. But if you are getting to that tournament level of things, sometimes you have to do funky things to throw the additional fact that you'll do a weird thing in their face. Sure. And it can't be completely unviable because you'll just get smacked for it. But if you throw the cheeky spike, then it's in their brain that you could throw a cheeky spike there too.
Yeah, now they know you're the kind of player who will play not the line, and they have to address that about you, and that makes it easier to play the line.
Yeah, which is any character at all, but considering he's so specific, you need a little bit more.
Sure, specifically with Beheaded, that's an important consideration.
Yeah, the benefit on Beheaded is you usually only need that one mix-up to put the game in your grasp to win. On that note, I have to escape this nightmarish trap you put us in. I have cats to tend to. But next time I'm at Palladium, Beheaded Mirror.
Bro, I just did that and I hated every minute of it. I was at the last tournament we had at Palladium. It was like a hair.
Well, I'm not going to put you through that again in that case.
I was terrible. I thought I died, and my opponent was like, "No, you have one life left." And I was like, "Oh, never mind." And then I got it, but it was terrible. I don't want to do it again.
All right.
I had a great time.
In that case, yeah. Thank you both so much for an incredibly insightful and really entertaining lesson on this character. I really, really appreciate your time, and everybody watching it. I hope that you got a lot out of this too. Please go out there and play some Beheaded and figure out some stuff that we missed and let us know.
Yeah, drag us in the comments.
Yeah, please. Yes, I play things weirdly a lot, so I would be shocked if this is how everyone else plays the same thing. So
absolutely.
I want to hear where I'm wrong.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.
Bye.